Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek, and I am finally getting caught up on a lot of things I've been needing to get caught up on. I have been spending quite a bit of time just taking care of a lot of life stuff and getting caught up on various things I need to take care of IRL, but things have finally calmed down and I can turn my attention back to the world of Warhammer without feeling like I am not taking care of my responsibilities as an adult, which are, it's always sucks when those interrupt with whatever you're doing. So one of the things, there's a number of videos that are going to be coming out about all kinds of different topics, from video games to tabletop stuff to lore stuff to just all the things. We've got Skulls coming up. By the time you see this video, Skulls will be out tomorrow. I will be live streaming that. Just a reminder, I'll be sending out various alerts to remind everyone, but I will be live streaming the Skulls event so that we can all enjoy all the game reveals together and whoever the new legendary hero for Total War Warhammer is and just all that jazz. I'm also going to be checking out probably on Friday. I'm going to be checking out probably tomorrow and Friday as well, because I suspect I'm going to like it quite a bit. The new 40k game, Bolt Gun. I should be playing that this week, so that should be a good time. That game is looking quite awesome, so I'm really excited to play some 40k Doom, essentially. Keep an eye on the Twitter and stuff for all that. But for today's actual topic for the video, we're finally catching up on Warhammer the Old World. This is something I've been needing to do for weeks. Like back in April, Warhammer Fest, they revealed 2 new miniatures, which I've been constantly like, I'm going to talk about it, and I couldn't get around to it. But now it's finally time to talk about it. And on top of that, they've released a new article that is very, very interesting. It doesn't have any mini reveals, but it does explain how the setting is going to start, which is very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts that I want to go through on that. So first, we're going to start with the mini reveals back from Warhammer Fest. So they talk about that they reveal a Tomb King and a Bretonnian. So here, you see this awesome Tomb King guy coming out over Bretonia, and I would love to play it all the way with sound, but I can't typically, because if you do, Games Workshop likes to use copyright music and then people get flagged for it. So I have heard about these guys. I haven't genuinely looked at them. So we have the Tomb King and Tomb King on foot, and I believe it is a Bretonnian Paladin on foot. The Tomb King looks absolutely gorgeous, and the Bretonnian also looks absolutely gorgeous. I love that he's just stabbed his sword through an orc head very, very casually. I really like the art. I really, really like the art, where it's got like the world with them coming over it and stuff. That's super duper cool. First new miniatures, the first genuinely brand new full-on minis are the Tomb King and the Bretonnian Paladin. So they do say that they're going to be new models will be released in plastic and Forge World resin, which is very interesting. And they're also bringing back metal minis as well, which we'll talk about, kind of about the resurrected minis. So first we've got the new Tomb King. He looks great. I think when I initially saw this model, I was kind of like on the skin. He's a bit the blue skin tone to kind of represent that he's like decayed flesh, I think is what initially kind of threw me off about the model, because I'm used to my Tomb Kings being a lot more kind of dirty and dusty. So like initially when I saw this, my first reaction is that I love it, but the paint job feels a little weird to me. So I am very much looking forward to seeing this miniature, but probably in some slightly different color schemes, as far as like making the skin more like what I would actually expect to see if I like woke up a mummy in the dry desert of Nehekara. But I think the model does look fantastic. I really like his Khopesh. I like his little staff of command. He's got a lot of very nice gold ornaments and theming. He's got various relics to many of the different gods of the desert. He's got a lot of Usirian imagery with the various scarabs. He looks very, very good. Genuinely looks awesome. I think for me, the real winner, though, is the Bretonnian Paladin. The Paladin looks absolutely incredible with this just massive two-handed sword that's just stabbed through an orc skull. And he's just got like a beautiful set of armor. He's got the really classic stag antlers for a helm, which is just he's just a beautiful looking model. I like his, like, this really gives off questing knight, a questing knight paladin vibes, where he's got the big two-handed kind of like questing knight sword, and he also just has a lot of the kind of equipment that really kind of makes him look the part. I am very, very curious if foot knights are going to be like a regular thing, or if this is genuinely a Bretonnian paladin with the virtue of humility. Which typically you had to take a specific virtue in order for your knight to be on foot, your paladins and your lords. They could not be on foot unless they had the specific virtue that allowed them to do so. I'm expecting to see a lot more foot knights in Warhammer the Old World, because although Bretonnians do practically worship the concept of riding on steeds, like presumably there are going to be individuals that fight on foot for different reasons. But overall, the models are absolutely gorgeous. They look fantastic. I am extremely pleased that Bretonnia and the Tomb Kings are where they're kind of starting as far as showing off new races, or new minis for old races, I should say. Because these two were kind of the most left behind. You know, I've said this multiple times, but in Age of Sigmar, as far as true aesthetic goes, there is no army like these two. They were the ones that kind of didn't make the leap into Age of Sigmar, where Games Workshop kind of cheekily turned the Flesh Eater courts into, like, from a lore standpoint, they're kind of new Bretonnia, and then from and kind of the same thing with the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. They're kind of the new Tomb Kings, but both of them are such... Well, obviously, the Flesh Eater Courts have nothing to do with Old Bretonnia other than just names. Like, they don't even have any cavalry units or anything like that. They think they have cavalry units, but they don't, actually. You know, they're just a bunch of wild, goofy monsters. Whereas the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, they have a lot in common with the Tomb Kings, but... as far as like, they do have an aesthetic that can kind of remind you of that, though the Bone Reapers seem to take their aesthetic from a similar part of like the real world as far as design goes, but a little not quite the same place. They pull from some other themes. They're similar to kind of those Egyptian themes, but they're not identical. And the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are not, you know, they're not true skeletons. They're more like, you know, they're Ossiarch constructs. They're bone constructs, but they don't look like skeletons. Not really. They kind of have that death motif, but they're not mummies and guys that are literally pulling themselves out of the sand. And they also don't have constructs. Not really. They only have two, being the giant catapult and then the big gator monster that chops people up and throws them into the back to be made into more Bone Reapers. But they don't have all the beautiful statues and bizarre creatures that the Tomb Kings were really beloved for. They also don't have archers or chariots, which are honestly, I think, the most defining aspect of the Tomb Kings from a cultural aspect. Their archers and their chariots were their kind of main focus. Infantry was their... They had pretty good infantry, but for them, it was really all about the constructs, the chariots, and the archers. Whereas with the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, it's more about lines of elite infantry or and kind of like lots and lots of different wizards and characters to help support that. But they don't, these two have kind of never truly been replaced. So the fact that they let in as the initial big reveals, I think is super duper awesome. And although they don't have the picture in this particular article, I do know that they're going to be resurrecting quite a few minis from the setting. Like, I think I saw that they're bringing back like the old Pegasus Knights, the Field Trebuchet. I think they showed off some Tomb King stuff that I don't super remember which I think makes sense. I am curious to what the overall plan with that is. To me, it kind of feels like the idea is they're going to come back and re-release a lot of the old sculpts so that they don't necessarily have to come out and unleash like entire armies worth of new models, because Games Workshop doesn't really do that anymore. Like even when they do introduce a range refresh or they introduce like a brand new race, like the Leagues of Votann, for instance, traditionally they don't do the entire army all at once. They do portions of it, and then the other portion will release like significantly later, like many months later. They like to stagger out the releases. It's not like back in the old days where, they'd release a new book with new minis and you'd have all the new minis for that new race or that major update. They just don't do that anymore. Not that I'm really sure they ever really did that, but they especially don't do it nowadays. So it would make a lot of sense if your goal is to have the armies be at the level they used to be at right at the start of the setting, to come out and say, okay, we're going to have like a selection of brand new sculpts, and then we're going to have all the old classic sculpts. And as time passes, they're going to release more new sculpts, and the old sculpts will be phased out. Which is, it makes sense. I think that's also a very intelligent way to handle it, because it's going to allow them to be able to come out with significantly larger ranges than they otherwise would have had. And the goal, I think, for the old world is to come out of the gate being able to say, you can play Warhammer Fantasy. Like any of the old fantasy armies you really like, any of the old fantasy factions you really like, all your favorite models, they're all here. Everybody's here to play with, except for like the old special characters. Like presumably those will not be returning, or if they do return, it'll be in a generic format as opposed to a new form, which is, I'm curious to what extent that's going to work. Like obviously, like when I think Bretonnia, like Lewin Lanker isn't around at this point, right? So what do you bring back the Lewin sculpt and say that you can play him as a generic lord on Hippogriff, or do you just not bring him back and only bring back the generic sculpt? I don't even remember if I'm sure there was a generic sculpt, but I don't even remember what it looks like. But overall, I think as far as all that goes, they're making really solid decisions. So now we're going to get into the controversial stuff. I have a lot of thoughts on this article. This came out today, which really is what finally kind of got me off my butt and was like, okay, I need to record a lot of stuff. So the Old World Development Diary, the main factions revealed. So this is what I expected, though a lot of the wording is really interesting. So they talk about what they revealed last time, and to me, it seems very noted that the start of Warhammer the Old World is, and they've said this, but they're continuing to confirm on it and kind of give us an idea of just how far we're starting in advance. We are not starting at the invasion of Azavar Kul. Not even close. We are starting decades, multiple decades before the invasion of Azavar Kul. So based on kind of everything we're hearing about and seeing, I am genuinely expecting the timeline to probably start around like 22, like 2270, 2260, somewhere in that ballpark. Like obviously you don't want to start too crazy far in advance, because I believe a lot of the characters are going to play into the invasion of Azavar Kul, but my money is on 2270 or 2280 as the starting, like when the modern timeline starts, when this game drops, because they're really not giving a lot at the beginning. Significantly less than I was expecting, especially when you consider older articles. So it says, over the last few weeks, we've shown you previously new models, shown off freshly painted examples. So let's talk about who will feature prominently in the game. The game will be set firmly within the old world itself, the lands between the coast of Bretonnia to the west and the World's Edge Mountains to the east, during the decades immediately before the Great War against Chaos and the Siege of Prague. Much of the action of the first wave of books and supplements takes place in and around the Border Princes, the barrier lands between Empire and Orc territory. Accordingly, we will be focusing on 9 core factions. The core factions being the Empire of Man, Dwarven Mountain Holds, Kingdom of Bretonnia, Wood Elf Realms, High Elf Realms, Orc and Goblin Tribes, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen Brayherds, and the Tomb Kings of Kimri. Now, this is very interesting. Because factions that they have kind of flat out advertised, so like factions as far as talking about designing them, like designing their literally designing their miniatures, as well as their art, their background, their nations, they have flat out talked about Kislev quite a bit, and Grand Cathay, and neither of those will be available in the first wave. Granted, this is only the first wave, and we're going to talk about that more kind of later on. But I do just kind of want to immediately start by calling out attention to that very interestingly, literally when they first announced Warhammer the Old World and gave us our first look, well, not when they first announced it, but when they gave us our first look at a playable faction, they started with Kislev, and Kislev is not a playable faction, which is very interesting. Granted, it seems that the initial fighting focuses quite literally, almost entirely around the Border Princes. Like that's the main fight at the beginning of the setting. So all of these different groups make a lot of sense when you have that in mind. Though I am personally we'll talk about it at the end. We'll talk about, I don't want to get myself into get myself all wrapped up. It says these armies will have rules published alongside the launch of the Old World and will be the pivotal players in the events covered in the narrative expansions and supplements. Fans of these armies can also look forward to some shiny new miniatures that will accompany the return of many classic kits. This picture is very interesting in light of that, because we have the classic War Dancers, and then we have the classic Tree Man, which is very weird because we still have Treeman sculpts, very, very nice modern Treeman sculpts. But it looks like they're also going to be releasing the legacy kits of minis that have modern kits and do not need the legacy kits. Which I don't think is a bad thing. Like if people want to get those models, hey, all the power to them. I think that's super duper interesting that they're bringing back some of the old minis, though you will note he is on a larger base size. It looks like he's on a 50 by 100 millimeter base, which is a chariot base, which this exact Treeman sculpt was on a 50 by 50 millimeter base when it was actually playable. So the last time it actually was in Warhammer Fantasy, it was on a significantly smaller base, and then when the Treemen got the new minis, they got put on larger bases to kind of go with how Warhammer Fantasy was increasing monster sizes. So that is, to me, very, very interesting. So it says, the battles of Warhammer the Old World take place in the decades immediately before the Siege of Prague. At the heart of the Old World lies the sprawling Empire of Man, founded long ago by Sigmar, but long since divided into rival states by centuries of civil war. West of the Empire is the chivalrous realm of Bretonnia. Throughout the World's Edge Mountains in the east of the Grey Mountains that lie between the Empire and Bretonnia is the realm of the dwarfs. In the arboreal gloom of the great forest of Athel-Loren reside the mysterious wood elves, kin to the seafaring high elves of Ulthuan, who, in their arrogance, maintain many colonies and outposts along the outcoasts of the old world and appoint themselves custodians over the affairs of men. Yet these powerful races and nations do not live alone within the old world, for they must deal constantly with evil creatures of chaos and destruction. All across the Empire and Bretonnia, savage beastmen bray herds explode from the depths of twisted and sickened woods. From desolate wildernesses and high moors rush the endless hordes of the orc and goblin tribes. From the distant arid land of the dead come the skeletal legions of the Tomb Kings of Khemri. And from the frozen north march the endless hordes of the warriors of chaos. In Warhammer, the old world, these core factions battle endlessly. Some seek only death and destruction. Others seek to reclaim lands they once ruled. Others seek to serve only their dark masters and overthrow the order imposed upon the world by the civilized races of men, dwarves, and elves, who, in turn, must march unceasingly to war to protect their realms from the darkness that looms. So here's where we start getting into the very, very different stuff. What about the other guys? Certain factions people remember from Warhammer Fantasy battles are not part of the narrative we're telling with the old world, but will be provided with rules at the launch of the game. This includes the Dark Elves, Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, Lizardmen, and Chaos Dwarfs. You'll note there's no mention of the factions that they've revealed so far, but are not on the initial playable list, being like Kislev and Grand Cathay. These legacy faction army lists will be available for free as PDFs as a service to fans who have these classic armies on their shelves, so they could still bring them to battle for old time's sake. We don't plan to publish rules for Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniatures, except for those units that were part of the game and setting during the final edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. So basically, any units that have been introduced to the game since Age of Sigmar started, for instance, like the Seraphon Raptidon riders, will probably not have rules. I'm curious if the Agrodons will have rules, because they're literally just new Kolbon riders. So, like, I suspect Agrodon Lancers will have rules, but I don't think the Raptidon Chargers or the Raptidon Lancers will have rules, because there wasn't really skink cavalry, with the exception of Tichi Huichi's Raiders. Like, I don't know, maybe they're going to come out and be like, well, you had Tichi Huichi's Raiders, so we'll give you rules. I once again, mixed feelings, but I don't want to get off on a huge tangent until I get to the end of the article. So let's keep going. Here we do see some more classic sculpts returning. So we've got the Orc Boar Boys. We've also got Orc Boar Chariots, and then we've got some lovely Dwarf Thunderers down here. What are the other armies up to then? During the century before the Siege of Prague, the Skaven Under Empire was riven by civil war to the extent that they retreated from the surface world. This is the origin of the belief that the Skaven aren't real. They vanished for several generations and became folklore. The Skaven re-emerged only after the Horned Rat himself was summoned at Skavenblight to end the strife and instill new purpose into his children. This ties in with the wider rise of chaos and destruction wrought by Asavar Kul, turning them into a new power in the world. The von Karsteins were all dead, for a given value of dead, after the Vampire Wars. Manfred, of course, is not dead, but he's pretending to be dead. He's just in hiding. With their defeat, other vampires went into hiding and became less active, waiting until the world became safe for them to emerge once more. And then the Dark Elves, Lizardmen, Chaos Dwarfs, and Ogre Kingdoms are all based far from the old world, and during this period are very inward-looking and insular races. Chaos demons have existed in the past and will again, but there is an ebb and flow to the power of chaos. In our period, chaos is at the lowest ebb in a long time. When Asavar Kul rises to become the 12th Everchosen, the power of chaos will build again. But we won't see demonic servants of individual gods for a while yet. Demons, and especially demon princes, exist. The latter given power by the belief of the mortals that worship them as demigods, but whole legions manifesting in the real world are currently incredibly rare. All right. So, and here we see quite a few more classic sculpts: the Swordmasters of Hoeth, the White Lions, and the Lothern Skycutters. I really those are the I want to say those are the Island of Blood Swordmasters, aren't they? I can't tell. It's been so long since I've seen them. But I will say, this leaves me honestly really conflicted. I'm not sure how to feel about certain aspects of this. On one hand, I'm glad that it seems to be that Warhammer the Old World is going to have a very strong focus on narrative, it sounds like. It sounds like they are genuinely trying very hard to tell a story. And therefore, like, if someone is not part of the story, they're just not going to be focused on, at least for the time being. I will say, I wish the wording in this article was a lot more clear as far as being, I would have liked it to be more blunt about what is the plan for the non-old world races, as far as like the far future of the old world. Like, like for the Dark Elves of Nagaroth, the Lizardmen of Lustria and the Southlands, the Ogres of the Ogre Kingdoms, and the Chaos Horse of the Darklands, etc., are they just not part of the setting? Like, and that's like, they're gonna, the thing for me that's very interesting is the Great War Against Chaos is a global affair. It was not contained to just the old world. This article almost seems to imply that it is purely contained to the old world, but that's not correct. That's just not accurate at all. Like the Dark Elves they take advantage of this entire conflict, and end up gathering, I'm gonna do some quick like drawing of borders as far as what is going on during the Realm of Chaos, or the Great War Against Chaos, that made it into a global conflict. The first big thing is that obviously you have everything going on in the old world. Kislev is going to have to play a role in that, but I'm kind of thinking Kislev are kind of in the same place as the demons, where they will be playable for sure. They're just not relevant to the whole Border Prince skirmish. Though personally, I think it's kind of bullshit that the Warriors of Chaos are involved in the Border Prince skirmish, opening fight, and not anybody else. Because the Warriors, come on, you're gonna tell me the vampire counts are not involved when there are clearly vampire count banners in the Border Princes? There are undeniably some vampire count Border Princes who are vampires, based on the map they showed us. But in any event, so you have all this stuff going on in the old world, which they've done a brilliant job kind of showing. In the coming decades, so in the next 10 or 20 years, the main thing we see happen is that Asvar Kul's invasion is not limited to just the Empire. Well, Kislev, technically. Asvar Kul himself ends up going to Kislev. But the war ends up impacting pretty much the entire planet, because the forces of chaos flood out of the Chaos Waste in every direction. So a massive horde goes to Grand Cathay. A massive horde goes to Nagaroth. Now, the Nagaroth horde ends up getting kind of redirected by Marathi, because Marathi gets on a Solifet, her Dark Pegasus, along with some of her attendants, and they all fly over to where this Chaos Horde is gathering, and she puts on this big ritual performance type thing that essentially seduces all of the Chaos Warlords, and she convinces them that they should join the Dark Elves, and the Dark Elves will help transport them to help invade Ulthuan. So the Chaos Horde ends up fusing with Malekith's legions, and they all launch this giant invasion of Ulthuan. And this leads to the biggest war Ulthuan has had since the Sundering, and also the biggest one they would see until the end times. And it's this giant conflict. Ulthuan gets completely embroiled in war, and the High Elves are utterly dedicated to that conflict, and it builds up to the Battle of Finival Plain, which I want to say takes place in 2499 or like 2300 or 2301 or something. It takes place very, very close to the end of the war. And in this big epic final conflict, Malekith is defeated. He is believed killed by Teclis. And then in the aftermath of the war, or in the aftermath of that particular battle, obviously the fighting isn't over. The Dark Elves are in retreat, but ultimately, there are still many battles that need to be fought for the High Elves to completely retake Ulthuan. So the High Elves are busy with that, and Teclis ends up leaving to go to the Empire. And literally the only force that could be spared is him and two other very powerful wizards, Yertle and Finrir. So the three of them go over to the Empire, where they meet with Magnus the Pious, and they start teaching Empire wizards how to use magic, quite literally as they're on the march to Kislev, so that the Empire will at least have some magic. And then they get there and they fight the battle at the gates of Prague, or the siege of Prague, and ultimately, all that stuff happens. So the Dark Elves play a significant role in the conflict, because they're the reason the High Elves cannot fully commit to the conflict. Granted, we're already seeing some pretty serious lore changes to the old world. Like, there are things happening in this that did not happen in the original story. Like, the Tomb Kings invading is not part of the original story. Granted, every time Games Workshop tried to do something with the Tomb Kings, this is always what they ended up doing. If you look at the Nemesis Crown event, the Nemesis Crown took place in like the modern setting. I want to say it took place after the Storm of Chaos, but it mainly revolves around Thorgrim Grudgebearer, Grimgor Ironhide, and Karl Franz chasing after the Nemesis Crown. But there's a whole storyline about every single race is up to something. And the Tomb Kings, Cetra the Imperishable launches an invasion of Altdorf because he basically knows there's a bunch of Tomb King artifacts that have been stashed within like the Cathedral of Sigmar and the Colleges of Magic. I think primarily the Colleges of Magic. So he leads an invasion force to like attack them. So this big fight breaks out as Cetra's fleet starts warring its way up through the old world, and they end up attacking like the Border Princes, Bretonia, like they attack a ton of people, and ultimately end up sending like a lot of agents into Altdorf who get a lot of their stuff back. But if you look at like the actual Storm of Chaos, so the Storm of Chaos, once again, was the first attempt at the end times. The Storm of Chaos featured the Tomb Kings versus the Greenskins as its primary conflict. For them, as the Tomb Kings were extremely busy taking advantage of kind of everything that was going on to reclaim large swaths of the Badlands. So basically, Cetra had reached the point where he was ready to start expanding Nehekara to start trying to recapture some of its old borders, and he ends up going to war with all of the tribes of the Badlands in order to push them out and reclaim territory that he saw as his own. So that's like kind of what the Tomb Kings were up to. So they seem to be kind of taking pages from that book and just inserting it into this timeline, which I think is fine. Like, I think it's great. I want every faction to be involved eventually, which kind of leads to my whole criticism here. Continuing onwards before I switch topics, because I could feel myself wanting to move on to the next topic. Grand Cathay is dealing with a huge civil war right now. Because the Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress have vanished. They've been gone now for a while, in what's known as, I want to say it's like the Age of Darkness or something like that. But Cathay is dealing with its own shit because all the Dragon Emperor and Moon Empress have vanished. The 5 remaining dragon children, actually it's probably 6. I don't know if everything that Total War has said about Cathay is like 100% canon, because if everything Total War has said is canon, then that means Shinzu is probably still around, the Light Dragon Child, because she vanishes right before the events of Total War Warhammer 3, which take place 100 years after the end of, 200 years after Asvar Kul's defeated. So presumably Shinzu is still around. So anyway, though, the Dragon Children are squabbling among themselves, and the Monkey King ends up invading Cathay with the help of Clan Eshin, and he ends up like actually taking the throne at Wei Jin. He takes the throne and he appoints a Clan Eshin warlord as his right-hand general, and having a Skaven as like a prominent new dictator in Cathay is finally what gets the Dragon Children to set aside their differences and focus their efforts on fighting the Monkey King just in time for the Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress to return to Grand Cathay, where, you know, the family of dragons ends up finally defeating the Monkey King, chasing him out, and the Skaven are utterly routed. And I believe that particular warlord is killed. But, and then in Lustria, the Lizardmen are primarily busy with like demon shenanigans, because when chaos ascends and becomes a major issue, there are there's one really big one, but there are a number of places within Lustria where there are basically permanent rifts to the realm of chaos open, and the Lizardmen do their best to contain them. Sotek has the worst one by far, and when chaos gets really, really bad, it inevitably kind of splits open and legions of demons come pouring out, and ends up being becoming these big invasions that lead to huge fights. So everybody's got stuff to do. Now that being said, the reason I'm kind of like, I'm not panicking really, and I'm not upset, I'm just a little worried, is because I felt this article was a little too vague, in that the article does not specify, it doesn't talk about their future plans very much, which understandably, they might not really know what their future plans are, as far as they don't know how well this is going to sell. Bringing back Warhammer Fantasy from the dead, I think, was not a decision taken lightly by Games Workshop. This is potentially a massive investment that, as far as they're concerned, needs to pay out. They are bringing back tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of old sculpts that I don't even know if they saved them. I mean, presumably they did, but like, who knows if they had to like have some of them recreated, or remade because the old ones were destroyed or have just like degraded in the time that they've been stored, because Games Workshop had zero intention of bringing this back. I've gotten to have a lot of great conversations with lots of people who have had various levels of employment with Games Workshop, much less relationships with Games Workshop, and there was zero intention for Warhammer Fantasy to ever come back. It was completely killed off. It was super fucking dead. And yet here we are. You know, it is back. It is full on coming back. So you kind of have to wonder what the long-term goal is, right? Because if like this is it, like if they come back Warhammer the Old World and this is all it ends up being, it never expands beyond this, I would be pissed. I'm going to be honest. I'd be really upset if they brought back the setting and just ended up cutting out 75% of like the rest of the world. Because like that's not really, I think, what anybody wants. Everybody wants at least the original game back, as far as, you know, Nagaroth, Lustria, and the Darklands, on top of everything we already have. But that could be the future plan. You know, it could be that they're coming in saying, all right, these are the 9 factions that we're starting with at the beginning that have fully playable rosters, they're going to have full books with lore and all this stuff. We're not going to give you any lore on the other races because they're not important to what's going on right now. They will become important, but at this exact moment, they are not going to be important. So personally, I really think it just depends on how it sells, because Games Workshop likes money, and that's what motivates all their decisions at the end of the day. Is that I think they're going to look at it and see what happens. You know, if Warhammer the Old World comes out and tons of people are playing the game and it's selling, like it's making tons of money, and they start releasing the actual campaign supplements and people are buying them and playing through them and loving them and stuff, then I expect the setting will continue to expand. Because to me, that's just the only thing that makes sense. I honestly feel like they worded it weirdly in this article, or just flat out poorly. Because when I initially read the article, I honestly got the impression that they're just never going to touch those other races. Like Lizardmen, Dark Elves, Skaven. Like Warhammer Fantasy without Skaven, it's just not Warhammer Fantasy. Like Like, I don't give a fuck who you are or who your favorite faction is. If you don't have Skaven, it's not a Warhammer setting. Like, it's just not. You cannot be Warhammer Fantasy without Skaven. They are far too critical to its design, and like just kind of one of its poster children. Like, I think you can get away without the Lizardmen, without the ogres, as much as I hate saying that. Like from a narrative perspective, they're not that important. But like Skaven, nah, get the fuck out of here with that. Way too important, of a race. So I can only help but hope dearly, and feel that this is simply the starting point. We're going to start with these 9 and we're going to see how it goes. I hope. I will say, I don't know if I'm even going to play the game really. I'm still kind of on the fence about it. Like, I think for me, it depends on, it depends a lot on how the rules are, I guess. But like, I'll buy the books, but I don't know if I'm really going to collect any minis, to be totally honest, because like I'm really enjoying Nighthaunt and I'm really enjoying Lizardman, and both those ranges are going to be unsupported in this game, it sounds like. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird situation. I also don't like their idea of like, oh, if it was around in 8th edition fantasy, we'll release rules for it. But if it came out in Age of Sigmar, then get fucked. Because like that makes, I could see that making sense for some, like if it's a new race or like a brand new concept. Like, should there be Sylvaneth in Warhammer the Old World? No, absolutely not. They don't make sense in the setting. They are very, very drastically different creatures from the original Wood Elves. I do not think they should be allowed within a 100-foot radius of where Warhammer goes to school. 100-yard radius, I should say. 100-mile radius, whatever. But like when I look at Lizardmen Raptidon riders, I mean, those are just Colchin riders. To me, those make too much sense not to have as playable models. It's also weird that like they've retired a number of models for Age of Sigmar that should be relevant to the Lizardmen in the Old World. Like, they retired our Razordons and they retired a number of our character options who were all alive and relevant during the Old World. So like, not sure what that's about. Also, like, I have so many questions. Like, this article, it answered some questions I had, but it left me with a lot more questions. And I'm doing my best to like really not worry about it until we actually start getting like some real release dates. Because there's no point in worrying about things that you just don't have enough information about, in my opinion. So I'm not that worried about it, but I will say that I don't think this article was written well. I think it was actually written quite poorly, in that it introduces a lot of very weird vibes, in my opinion. I also like it kind of brings back the whole question that I thought was settled of what is Warhammer the Old World about? Is it purely about the Old World, as in that geographical location, and will build up to the Great War Against Chaos and that's it? We're done? Is it, no, that's where we're starting, but Warhammer the Old World is about Warhammer Fantasy, in which case it's going to be like this expanded world? Because why did they even bother with the Cathay article is what I really want to know. Like, why did they even bother at all showing us Grand Cathay? Like, they showed us Grand Cathay, they showed artwork, they showed like putting the factions on this map, like this Old World map that they're so proud of, which is a beautiful map, but like they put Grand Cathay on it. And it's like, why did you do that if they're not going to be playable? So like, they have to be playable eventually, but if Grand Cathay is going to be involved, then it's absolutely not the Old World. Like, it's just the Warhammer world. Because Grand Cathay has no fucking stakes in the Empire. They're too busy with their own shit. So yeah, I don't know. That I really, the more I think about it and the more I mull it over, I really think that this is just about the start of the setting. That they're going to come out and they're going to say, all right, you nine kids, you 9 factions, y'all are the starting roster. You're going to be the ones that are punching each other in the beginning. Get on. You're going to be the ones having stories written about you at the start. The other 6 of you, like the rest of you kiddos, y'all are going to go sit in the reserves. We will call you out when it's your turn, but like, go have fun. Here's some PDFs so you can actually play the game, but like, you're not part of the story yet. We'll call you when it's your turn. Cause like, man, I cannot express how sad I would be if they squandered bringing back Warhammer Fantasy just to focus on like almost half of the roster of the old game, especially when you consider like the sheer fucking number of factions in like Age of Sigmar or 40K. Like Age of Sigmar has like 20 plus races in it. It's absolutely obscene how many races there are. And they balance it reasonably well. As far as like, you know, getting rules out and like everyone getting to participate in narrative events. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. This article just leaves me in a weird headspace. Overall, I think I am excited. I'm worried. I am excited. I do hope the PDF rules are actually good. Games Workshop, in my experience, like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just being honest. Whenever like they put out legacy rules, it is traditionally, in the fantasy world at least, been shit. Like, they've been awful, like borderline unplayable. They tend to be absolutely terrible rules that don't seem to have any future proofing. And they don't get balanced. That's the real bitch, is like legacy rules, like usually means that you can't play them in tournaments. You can't show up to play them in events, and Games Workshop will release them and then fucking dump them on the side of the street and like never go back, which like, that's going to completely fucking ruin this game for me. If, like they come out and release a PDF for the Lizardmen and it ends up being like terrible, or they release it and it never gets any updates whatsoever. And they're just like, well, too bad. You know, you just play the wrong army. Like, then you shouldn't have brought back the setting. Like, if you're not gonna at least honor the original 16 races, you should not have brought back the setting, in my opinion. So like I said, hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully this Games Workshop we're dealing with has future plans, and this is only the beginning of the roller coaster. And these 9, it's really only highlighting them from a narrative perspective. I still think it's bullshit that the Warriors of Chaos slipped in. Like, the fact that the Warriors of Chaos are one of the major 9 in a Border Prince war, not the vampire counts, who are right fucking there. Like, the vampire counts are in Sylvania, and in their Border Prince map that they put out, like, there are clearly some vampire Border Princes. That is absolute horseshit. I feel like the only reason the Warriors of Chaos are being included is because they're like, oh, well, we have to, because it's the Warriors of Chaos. But like, they would not be there. There would not be a Chaos invasion in the Border Princes without like, and then look to turn around and stare me in the face and say, yeah, there's no Skaven and there's no vampires. Like, fuck you. That's bullshit. That is massive bullshit. Manfred von Karstein is still alive and active. There's still tons of vampires who are not von Karsteins who would be taking advantage of the lack of von Karsteins. There are blood dragons running around. There are Lamians. There are Strigoi. There are Necrarchs that don't give a fuck about the vampire counts. And the Border Princess is far away from the Empire, generally speaking. Like, why would they care that the Empire has barely and struggled to defeat the vampires? And plus, it's been quite a while since Manfred's defeated Helfin. by this point. So yeah, I really dislike I really dislike their decision making on that, especially because the vampire counts don't even need any new models. Like, their range is beautiful. Like, yeah, sure, they could use like, I guess, some new like special characters, whatever. But like this, the Grave Lords, the Soulblight Grave Lords, updated almost the entire OG vampire count range. We have new zombies, we have new direwolves, we have new fellbats, we have new bat swarms, we have new Graveguard, we have new skeleton warriors, we have new, we have lots of new vampires. We have so much stuff. We have new Black Knights, we have new Blood Knights. Like, we're great. Like, I don't understand what the logic is behind not having vampires. But once again, maybe it's planned for later. The Tomb Kings are weirdly pigeonholed, where it's like it's only Cetra. All of the other Tomb cities are not currently involved. That may change with time. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what y'all think. I could sit here and just kind of talk myself in circles forever. But I'm gonna go ahead and I think wrap it up here. I am not a fan of this article. It to me, it introduced a lot of really unnecessary worries that I think if they had used clearer language, they could have taken care of that. But yeah, man, it is what it is. Let me know what y'all think. Are you excited? Are you worried? Are you intending on playing one of the 9 factions, or were you hoping to play one of the 7 factions that got left out? Let me know what y'all think. But yeah, anyway, hopefully we'll get more news on this soonish. Personally, I'm not expecting another update for at least a month. But we'll see what happens. Thank you all so much for watching. I will talk to you soon. Take care.